Hi, my name is Dr. Russell T. Warne, and I'm an assistant professor of psychology at Utah Valley University. I made this video to explain a study I did about disproportionate representation in gifted programs. This study was published in 2013 in the Journal for the Education of the Gifted. My two co-authors on the study were UVU students, Braden Anderson and Elise Odasso, the latter of whom is now a doctoral student at Texas A&M University. In most research on the demographics of gifted programs in the United States, Asian and white students are disproportionately overrepresented in gifted programs, while Hispanic and Black students are underrepresented. In this study, we wanted to learn if the same was true in Utah. We thought it was important to study the issue in a less diverse state because we were concerned that minority students in less diverse states might have more barriers to access to gifted programs. Our data were taken from the Utah State Office of Education, which had data from 6 districts, which together were representative of the state. This table shows the counts of gifted and non-gifted students for each racial and ethnic group. When we used race and ethnicity as the only predictor of whether a student was identified as gifted, the results are shown here. In this table, Asian and Pacific Islander students are overrepresented in gifted programs relative to white students. Multiracial students are slightly overrepresented, while Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans are slightly underrepresented. However, the results for these last 4 groups are not statistically significant, probably because of small group sizes. Because low-income students are also frequently underrepresented in gifted programs, we wanted to see the impact of adding a variable for socioeconomic status. This controls for socioeconomic status and shows the impact of a student's race independent of family income. The result is shown here. Indeed, low-income students were less likely to be identified as gifted. Adding this variable still made the Asian and Pacific Islander students overrepresented in gifted programs, but it did slightly reduce the severity of the underrepresentation among the other groups. But the results were still not statistically significant for Hispanic, African American, or Native American students, or for multiracial students. The last variables we added to the statistical model were the 3rd grade standardized achievement scores in math and reading. We did this because we wanted to control for the achievement gap among racial and ethnic groups. This table shows the results, which were a huge surprise for us. When we controlled for academic achievement in English and math, the underrepresentation among minority students disappeared completely. Asian and Pacific Islanders were still overrepresented in gifted programs, but now Black and Hispanics were too. The multiracial Native American students were slightly overrepresented, but not to a statistically significant degree. This means that if you have 2 students with equal socioeconomic status and test scores, then the non-white student is more likely to be identified for the gifted program compared to a white student. This result has never been found in gifted education research before, but similar results have been found in other studies of special education program representation and in the employment literature. Finally, it is important to note that the disadvantage among low-income students was diminished so much that it was not statistically significant. The most surprising result was that the disproportionate representation for minority students and low-income students in gifted programs can be explained entirely through the achievement gap. This has important implications. First, whatever causes some groups to be accepted into gifted programs less frequently than others is not unique to gifted programs. Rather, it is probably the same thing that causes achievement gaps among groups. As a result, efforts to curb underrepresentation that focus merely on the gifted program will likely be unsuccessful in achieving proportional representation. Rather, the most effective strategy will be closing the achievement gap as a whole. The other major implication is for researchers. It is clear that just comparing demographic groups' identification rates for gifted programs can lead to overly simplistic results. Instead, it may be best to always control for achievement test scores when judging the degree of disproportionate representation among demographic groups in gifted education. This would be the only way that scholars will know if minority students face barriers to these programs apart from the achievement gap. It is important to mention, though, that this is just one study in one state. Researchers should replicate this finding so that scholars can know if it's just a fluke or if the achievement gap can explain disproportionate representation in other states' gifted programs. Another implication is that gifted education personnel should join with their colleagues in other branches of education to reduce the achievement gap among all students. Finally, these results are not permission to ignore disproportionate representation when it occurs, but rather it gives clues to whether efforts to reduce that under or overrepresentation will be effective. Thanks for watching this video. Please click the link in the description of the video to read the entire study, and feel free to contact me at rwarne@uvu.edu to discuss this study further.